Welcome everybody. Yep, people are starting to roll in. That's great. So we had about 80 or so registered today. So excited to see y'all starting to join us. Welcome to the 2025 Hyperspace Challenge webinar series. I'm Kelly Stafford, Interim Program Manager for the Hyperspace Challenge, and I'm coming to you live from beautiful Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm joined by Dorothy Duran, the Hyperspace Challenge Senior Program Manager. She's busy making everything work. Take a moment as you're coming in, put your name and where you're from in the chat, and the state you're calling from. We would love to hear it. And it's always one of my favorite parts of these calls is to see who's on and where you're from. So this Hyperspace Challenge series, is part of an ongoing series that is hosted by Hyperspace Challenge, the Air Force Research Lab, and the U.S. Space Force to strengthen the connective tissue between diverse communities within the space industry. Our goal with this series is to address common roadblocks for commercial industry and universities who desire to support the mission of the U.S. government. So today we are talking about pathways to clearance, which I'm sure has presented a challenge for many of you on this call at one time or another. And it's a tough one because on one hand, these rules are in place for a reason. On the other, they hinder involvement of our small businesses. We can't solve all of these problems today, but here's what we hope to do: demystify the security clearance landscape for the startups, and cut through common misconceptions, help founders understand the clearance, when clearance is required, so they don't overcorrect too early, clarify the distinct roles of government resources, legal advisors, and specialized security consultants, among other things. So I am joined today by Joseph Nieto he's an associate attorney with Aegis Space Law. He's going to be the narrator today. And we also have Tim Lockhart, who's technical advisor at DARPA, and Peter Jackson, who is the director of managed security services for NookWorks. If you have questions as you're listening, please put them in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, I'm going to ask you to put them in the Q&A. It's just easier for our narrator or for our moderator to get them all in one place. So we appreciate you doing that for us. And with that, Joseph, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Um, Glad you all could be here. I see there's plenty of people in the room already. Um, Tim, I'm going to go ahead and start the conversation with you. I'm particularly interested in maybe starting at the top level and going down here. Um, when we think of a security clearance, we think of these uh, confidential, we should give these key terms like confidential, top secret, classified, and maybe a couple of other terms like FCL and PCL. Could you describe what a security clearance is?
Yeah, so a security clearance, in essence, is it's basically a qualification or trust from the government that's issued that indicates that you are allowed to work on classified information. It is based off of primarily a need to know and also a background check to verify that you don't have anything in your past or your connections that would give the government concern about sharing classified information with you. And when we talk about, an FCL versus a PCL, really the FCL is the short for a facility clearance and PCL is the shorthand, the acronym for a personnel clearance. I would like to say that I personally do not like the term facility clearance because I think it is a misnomer. A lot of people think that a facility clearance is tied to a physical building, your place of work. In a way it can be, but really the facility clearance is more like an entity or an organization clearance. It's an investigation and an approval for your company or your university or the entity that is looking to do classified work. Whereas the personnel clearance is you as an individual. Do you have the access and the need to know and approval to engage in classified conversations or support classified work?
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And Tim, could you quickly also tell us what your background is and how you fit into this discussion of what a security clearance is and how to get one?
Absolutely. So I will first start off by telling everybody that I am not a security expert. I am not a security person. I'm actually a systems engineer. I'm a former Marine Corps officer and engineer that primarily worked on optics and laser systems. But at the end of the day, I really just enjoy solving new and interesting challenges. I've been at DARPA now for over 8 years and started working on space systems. But as I was working through space systems, started running into the challenge that a lot of things in space become classified pretty quickly. And a lot of the innovation and cool things going on in space over the last 5, 10 years is being done by commercial companies and small startups, not necessarily the traditional large prime contractors. So at DARPA, we're really looking for new cutting edge technology, getting the latest capabilities, taking risk. And if there's a mismatch there, right? So if we're trying to work with new technology and innovation, and we need to do that, but a lot of it's classified. But the innovation is taking place in your smalls and non-traditionals and commercial companies that don't have
Mhm.
clearances, then we're very limited in who we can actually work with. So we actually started a DARPA initiative called the Bridges Program back in 2023. It stands for Bringing Innovation to, oh geez, it's been a while, Bringing Classified Innovation to Defense and Government Systems. And the entire purpose was let's go out and find these small innovative companies. Let's get them sponsored for clearances so that we can actually talk and engage with them and let them know these are the challenges, these are what we're trying to do, and turn them loose and let them actually try to come up with solutions and at the same time grow out the uh, defense industrial base for classified um, performers. And as we went through that, then we started seeing that when you take people that don't have a security background or not much experience working with the Department of Defense, then they really struggled going through the facility clearance process. So now actually we're working on a software program called Turbo FCL. Think TurboTax, but for the facility clearance process, where we want to make it available to all these type of performers we're looking for, so that when they get sponsored for a clearance, they can actually use the software system to give them insight into the process, guide them through the steps, autofill their paperwork, remove all the human error from the process so they can get through it quicker, easier, with less fuss. Um, and then really, we're actually, I'll put a plug in, we are actively seeking beta testers for this software right now. So for the rest of the year, if anyone's going through the clearance process and they would like a free copy of Turbo FCL, I can leave a link in the chat, but we are making that available to people as we prove out this capability. So um, I've just learned a lot about the process over the last couple of years as I've seen companies go through it and figured out the common sticking points and then trying to apply innovation technology to help solve those
Mhm.
challenges for the type of people that we have on this call.
And I think, Tim, practical experience is going to be key in this discussion, especially. So thank you for describing broadly for the audience what the security clearance is. And thank you for being here with your expertise. I want to move over maybe to Peter now. Peter, how do you fit into this discussion? And when, and then I'll throw the second question at you. When founders hear the term security clearance, they might think they need it immediately. When do they need it from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So my background is I spent 10 years at Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. I was one of the lead analysts for looking at companies coming into the security program. So broadly, when you think about security clearances, there are different agents, there's different authorities within the US government that can grant clearance. One of the largest and most widespread is DCSA, the agency I formerly worked for. And they manage all the security clearances for all DoD activities. Other agencies that cover clearances would include DOE, CIA. There's a few others. I think DNI has its own as well. So I worked for the agency that was overseeing around 12,000 entities, and I led teams that looked at the foreign ownership, control, and influence at those teams. I also worked in CFIUS for a while as well. And currently, I work at Nooks, which is a company that creates SCIFs. We're trying to be the WeWork of the defense industrial base. So if you need access to a SCIF and you don't have $10 million in 3 years to invest in building your own, you can come license space with us. The particular thing that I do for Nux right now is I'm helping build Turbo FCL. We're partnered with Tim, and I'm also in charge of our managed security services, which is a fractional FSO. So if you are a small business, you're getting into this space, you need access to classified information, and you need somebody to sort of guide you through that process. We have consultants that will walk you through that, and that's a service that we provide as well. Remind me of your question, Joe.
Of course. So when founders and companies
Oh,
hear
right.
security
Yeah,
clearance, when do they need to apply?
Yeah, so you'll hear competing you'll hear competing information on this, and every case is going to be unique. In general, the standard process for acquiring a facility security clearance is, after having won an award on a contract, the government will sponsor an entity with access to classified information in order to complete its performance on that contract. That's the standard path. So if you look in the NISPOM, which is the National Industrial Security Program Operating Manual, that's what governs all of the security clearance policies. That the standard path that they assume is that you are a company that has been sponsored by the government to complete a task under a contracting activity. And in pursuit of that contracting activity, you need access to classified information. That's why you're being sponsored. You cannot apply to get a clearance. You must be sponsored either by the government or by a prime contractor. A lot of folks, though, in industry have found that it is a competitive advantage to have a clearance. This leads to sort of a interesting cycle or feedback loop where a lot of companies are trying to get a clearance before they have a contract that requires them to have access to classified information. And the issue that you run into is that the system is intentionally designed to stop people from getting a clearance before they have a need to know. So if you think about, the worst case scenario, the counterintelligence scenario, what this entire system of checks and balances around security clearances is trying to prevent is somebody who doesn't need access to classified information and might be responsive to foreign tasking getting access to classified information. That's what this entire system is trying to prevent. And so somebody who's trying to get into the security realm for commercial reasons because they want to make their business more competitive, which is totally valid, that activity is in many ways indistinguishable from activity that would be an intelligence concern. So the right time to get a clearance theoretically is after you've won the award. But what a lot of people are trying to do is get their clearance before they win an award, which is sort of backwards. And so if you're running into a lot of problems in the system, one way to navigate that is if you are working with a prime contractor or you're working with a government agency and you already have a contract to do work that is not classified, you can talk to your program manager, your project manager, about potentially modifying that contract. So that's activity you're already working on, and modifying that contract in order to support some classified aspect that would create a legitimate need for your company to have a clearance and go through the vetting process, getting you into the clearance process, but it satisfies all the expectations of the NISPOM.
So security clearances are required on a need-to-know basis, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So let's take this maybe a step back. And by the way, Tim, I'm very interested to hear maybe if you have a thought on this too. But Peter, let's broad spectrum. Let's say you have a need to know and you need a security clearance. What does that process look like from maybe start to end or start to a natural end point?
Yeah, so the first step, like I said, is usually you have a contract. So you have a contractual activity that you're performing on. The clearance process starts with a sponsorship from your prime contractor or from the government. There's a form DD-254 on which they'll fill out information about your business, information about the clearance, information about the contract activity, information about where that will be performing the classified work. That is attached to a sponsorship letter or sponsorship package that then goes in most cases. If you're doing work with the DoD, that'll go to DCSA, DOE, CIA. Some of the other agencies have their own approaches, but I'm going to navigate the DCSA process because that's what most companies are going through. Once you've been sponsored, DCSA will send the company, so they'll send you a letter that says, or an email that says, welcome to the sponsorship process. It'll have you navigate a 21-day process where you have 21 days to submit information back to DCSA about your company. That'll include things like your operating agreement. There's some forms you have to fill out, like the DD 441 and the SF 328. The SF 328 is the disclosure of foreign ownership, control, and influence. So if you have investors, you'll have to talk to your investors about any foreign capital that's invested in your company so that you can disclose that to DCSA. You will have to submit a list of your key management personnel, which includes your senior management official. And that's not somebody you can designate. That's whoever is legally in charge of your company. So if you're an LLC, you're going to be your manager. If you're a corporation, it's going to be whoever your CEO or executive chairman is. And again, it depends on the legal documentation. So DCSA will tell you if they're going to read your legal documentation and tell you if you've got the wrong person there. But whoever the senior management official is, that person's going to have to be cleared. So you're going to have to submit information about them, submit information about your FSO as well, your facility security officer, and also your ITPSO, which is your insider threat program security officer. So those three individuals, they can be the same human being, but those three roles need to be disclosed. There's some other things as well. So you're going to have to gather all that information, submit it to DCSA. After that, they will review your package. They might have questions, and so there might be a little back and forth. But at that point, they will sponsor those individuals for clearances. Each of those people that are in your key management personnel or your KMP list, those people all need to be cleared. And so they will have to fill out an SF-86, which is the personnel security clearances. They have to get their clearances. Once they have their personnel security clearances, and DCSA has already reviewed your facility clearance package, then the facility clearance can be granted and everything goes live.
How long do these clearances last usually?
Because it's tied to a need to know, it usually follows the pop of a contract, but it can be shorter, it can be longer. I think if your contract expires, you have, I think it's either 6 months or a year, depending on the level of clearance to actually maintain your facility clearance. It takes on the way in, getting in, the long pole in the tent is usually getting people cleared. So getting a person cleared can take 6 months to a year. Getting an actual facility cleared, if everybody else is cleared and all the paperwork's in order, that can take a couple of weeks. I mean, the facility clearance is, it can be a very lengthy process, especially if there's lots of negotiations, especially around foreign ownership, control, and influence. So which is called FOCI. So if you have FOCI, that will have to be mitigated some way. And so you're going to have a conversation with DCSA's legal team around setting up a mitigation for that. And that's a whole subtopic we could go into. But that can lengthen the process. And also if you're people that need to get cleared, if they're having a tough time getting cleared, so if they've spent a long time overseas or they've got a lot of foreign investments or contacts or something like that, that can lengthen the time that investigation takes. But assuming that people are cleared and your business is, U.S. owned or sort of private individuals who are all in the U.S., a clearance can be a fairly quick process, and it can last for, there's not really a cap. So, I mean, Lockheed Martin's probably been cleared for 50 years. So.
And either Tim or Peter, I'm really curious. Peter, in your really good description here, you mentioned that there's some back and forth for when you're applying and going through this process. Where are the sticking points? Is there a place where applicants get sort of caught up, which increases the time it takes to get this, or maybe even the costs?
Yeah. The sticking points that I've observed are, one, and this is the big one, companies don't disclose enough ownership information. Sometimes it's because you don't know. If you've received investment from a venture capitalist or a private equity firm, you might not know where the money's coming from. So you can submit to DCSA, this is on the ownership information that I have. That might not be sufficient. And so then DCSA would have to go back to the investment firm that you're working with to determine whether or not there is foci in your ownership chain. And the reason they're doing that is DCSA needs to ensure that whoever has access to classified information cannot be essentially bought out by somebody who's responsive to a foreign interest. So if you have access to classified information, and let's say one of your key investors or one of the key investors behind your private equity firm or whatever the fund is that invested in you, if there's somebody back there who has an interest in essentially purchasing access to classified information, that's the person that DCSA is, that investor, that influence is specifically what DCSA is trying to prevent from occurring. And so a lot of times companies will go in and just sort of shrug and say, I mean, I think this is who owns, if you filter up, but they're not thinking about it from the perspective of DCSA has to make sure that nobody can buy access to classified information. So that's one information gap where DCSA will go back and forth with you, making sure that you have awareness of that, or that you've prepped the ground with your investors ahead of time to say, like, hey, I'm going in for a security clearance. I'm going to need this information. Please talk to your legal team so that they can either be ready to disclose that to DCSA, or that we can have that information on hand for that application. And by the way, you might think that you can sort of like navigate that, but I can tell you when I was at DCSA, one of the one of the major space companies did not want to disclose things to DCSA. And you would think like this is an enormous company. I'm a 30-year-old at the time, like GS13, nobody. But the reality is, if they wanted access to classified information, they had to disclose that information. So I had legal counsels from some of the biggest companies in the world telling me, I don't have to tell you this stuff. And in the end, they did have to tell me that stuff. So just because you feel like it's sensitive information, or like your particular situation, you're really concerned about your privacy, valid concerns, but I will tell you that everyone in the US who wants access to classified information will either disclose that information to DCSA or they won't get cleared. And that's really that's where you'll find yourself. So that becomes a huge sticking point, is actually getting comprehensive ownership information. The other big sticking point, and then I'll shut up, is a lot of times there's an individual in your company who doesn't want to get cleared because they don't want to go through the whole SF-86 process. That it's a rigmarole. Maybe this person's like a bazillionaire and they just don't feel like they have time, but they have access or they have control of your company in such a way that they cannot be excluded. In that situation, trying to navigate that or structure around that person or try to hide that person is going to just take you a tremendous amount of time. So those are the other situations and DCSA is pretty good at catching. If you're trying to intentionally structure your business so that you're hiding somebody's influence because they don't want to go through the clearance process, DCSA will pick up on that, and it'll take you a tremendous amount of time, and you'll still wind up having to do it. So the reality is, if you have people or you have investors who need to be seen or need to be reviewed and investigated by DCSA, go with the process, because what really takes the most amount of time is when people either don't understand or they are intentionally trying to hide something that DCSA really does need to investigate.
So so just maybe to summarize that a little bit, right? The security clearance process isn't solely about the facility, but a lot of it has to do with the individuals involved with the company seeking that clearance.
Right. I mean, a company is essentially just a vehicle for a person. So the company itself doesn't exist without humans, right? I mean, ultimately you have to have a human somewhere in the loop. And so a lot of the reviews that that happen on a company do of necessity also look at the people. I mean, that the two are tied.
Mhm.
I will say to Tim's point about the facility clearance, you aren't clearing like a building. What you're actually clearing for DCSA is a cage code. Cage code is a commercial and government entity code. It's a five alphanumeric symbol code. That cage code is a joint between a legal entity and a physical address. So I'm a legal entity as a human being. I have an address as my house. The juncture, the overlap in that Venn diagram is where you can get a cage code. I could have another house, which would mean I would have a separate cage code for that house. So in the same way
Mhm.
you have a company has an address, that legal entity at that address is the cage code, and that's what gets cleared. This can trip a lot of people up because you think it's your company that's being reviewed, and it is. You can think it's your facility, that's your address that's getting cleared, and it is. But your company, your legal company, could also get reviewed at a separate address if they have a separate cage code. Or you and another company could be co-located at one address, which would also have to get two different clearances if you're looking at the two different entities. So that's just sort of a. I think in general across industry, nobody is thinking about this kind of stuff the way that DCSA thinks about it. It's a little weird. It's off the
Mhm.
path, but that is yeah. That's a helpful way to think about it. Is what's actually getting cleared is the cage, uh, which is the overlap of a company and an address, not just a company or not just a facility.
Mm. I want to jump over to Tim. Tim, what are your thoughts about the sticking points? And I'll even pose another little bit of nuance here. For small business founders trying to get into government work, what should they focus on early on when they're considering getting a clearance or not?
Ooh, okay. I'll address the first one because I definitely have thoughts there, and they're gonna the Venn diagram between what Peter said and what I'm gonna say is, there's some overlap. But I'm also going to preface by saying nothing I'm saying is a personal dig against DCSA. I will start off by saying that when I've talked to DCSA, depending on the time, it's I've been told that initial FCL packages are either they're rejected somewhere between 50 and 80% of the time. So the first one is to let people know that if you do run into an issue, it's not just you, right? Not lots of entities struggle and they run into sticking points, and their first submission is sent back for various reasons. The sticking points that I've seen firsthand, um, one that we already addressed is confusion over what exactly is a facility clearance. I think Peter gave a good description of the understanding that with the cage, but also the better way of thinking about it is it's primarily an investigation into the people that control the company. Um, so to look, you have to understand what type of business structure you have, and then therefore who does DCSA consider your key management personnel that need to be investigated, and then understanding how you can have delays if you have the foci concerns, foreign ownership, control, and influence, and that's with people on your board, your CEO. You also have to look at as David talked on, or sorry, Peter, what you're dealing with when you're taking investments, right? So that also ties into if you're wanting to work with the government, it can be tough for a small business because you may get started not focused on government and your goal is maybe commercial market, or I'm going to take some investor money because I'm not thinking about where it's coming from. I'm trying to keep the lights on and my employees employed. And then when you go to try to work with the government and you're looking at the clearance issue, now all of a sudden, oh, wait, I took money from some investors that, oh, you go through two different channels. The money's coming from China or Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or somewhere, and then that's going to like tie you up. So that can be a big sticking point. Other ones are kind of just like little procedural things, such as there's a certain step in the process where you have to be able to, I believe David, or sorry, Peter, why do I keep calling you David? I've known you for a while. Is, I believe it's when you have to upload certain documents to NIST, is that you have to get a security token or, your PKI in order to certify. And so DCSA will send you an email and say, hey, you have 3 weeks to do this. and you're going to require a token. What they don't tell you is that the token takes 2 weeks to get from the time you start your application. So if you're busy and you'd like, all right, I have 3 weeks to do this, this should take me 2 hours. You may not get your token until there's 5 days left, and then realize, oh crap, I need an extension because getting this token through like IdenTrust or something is going to take 2 weeks. So it can just be like lots of little misunderstandings about that. I think some of the other ones are just you have to put in the same information on several different forms. Um, that it all has to match, and it also all has to match what's in the government databases. So say you have a thing like your company's name in the government database. Sam is Timco LLC. But when I put on my form that the name of my company is Timco, that doesn't match Timco LLC. So therefore, it's little inconsistencies like that that can cause little trip ups. So you have to be accurate, you have to be precise, and you have to be consistent. Especially with your paperwork, and try to dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure everything's matching when you submit it. As far as getting into the government work, I'd say the first thing is get an understanding of what's required for a facility clearance. I can tell you that Nooks has put together a great resource for that. Peter, I'll let you plug that when you want to. But it's understanding what's going to be required of you when it comes to your foreign ownership and control, what paperwork you're going to have to submit, what things you have to look at, the training requirements, and understanding, especially who you're going to designate as your FSO, is going to be a lot of work. And take careful consideration of who's going to be assigned that position. It generally should not be your CEO that thinks, oh, I can just do this as a side job when it's got some pretty hefty requirements. So it's really just getting a good idea of what are the requirements before you just and make that evaluation of, is this juice going to be worth the squeeze? Because it's not just something that can be done, just a little bit on the side. It requires careful consideration and effort.
So the due diligence matters when it comes to applying for these processes because small details can make or break, or at least make the government ask questions. So maybe along that same line, let's talk about the maybe tools and experts that are available for founders, especially for small businesses whose time and money are limited. What sort of tools and people out there exist to help with this process, maybe from start to end, beginning with foci, wherever?
I'll start with this
up.
one. So again, I'll say the main things is you can try to access of publicly available resources off of the DCSA webpage. They have a PDF that you can download called the FCL Handbook. You can just Google DCSA FCL Handbook and get the direct link and download that. That's always a great starting point. You can also search for the NISPOM if you really want to get into the nitty gritty and torture yourself a little bit. It's not that bad, but it can be a little lengthy. There are definitely FSO or industrial security specific companies that provide expertise to do this. Again, comparing to taxes, think of them as your CPAs, your certified public accountants, who they know the ins and outs, and they can enter into contractual agreement with you and provide their services to guide you through the process. And also, they can serve as like your AFSO. Like your FSO has to be the actual employee of the company, but you can contract out someone that helps monitors training, since the security clearances does a bunch of the work for you as that security expert. Just like if you're a small business, like, oh, I don't have time for a full-time HR person or contracts person, you can, hire people that kind of just do this for multiple different companies. It's the same type of thing. We are currently, like I said, developing Turbo FCL, which is the goal is to have a software package that's the equivalent of providing that expertise specifically for the FCL process, not for the, once you have the clearance in the day-to-day where you could still use that industrial security support, but to help you just get through the process quickly and easily. One other thing I'd like to plug real quick actually here is from DARPA, is that when, Peter was talking about the potential challenges of accepting foreign investments that you don't know where the money's coming from, you're not paying attention to, DARPA actually has something called Venture Horizons. It's a not necessarily program. It is a effort that we provide to DARPA performers, especially startups, where we vet and work with defense-focused venture capitalists and private equity funds, that we vet and we make sure that all the capital they're bringing is non-foreign capital, and that therefore we actually host events to match up startups when they're doing their series fundraising rounds with these investors, so that they can, try to make those matches, get the right investments, but also be sure they can trust the people that they're working with and where the money is coming from. So it's not going to impact their ability to get a clearance or work with the government in the future. Because we definitely see that as important. We don't want people with great ideas, again, accepting foreign money to keep the lights on, and then they're not able to work on classified problems. So in summary, DCSA FCL handbook is always your first stop. There's definitely companies that can provide expertise to help you out, such as Nooks. And then also, I think I saw somebody put in the chat Turbo FCL, where people can go register, get it for free, and then we hope in about a year we'll have it as a commercially available product.
And Tim, we did get a question along these same lines. Somebody was wondering if the DARPA Bridges program is still open, or if Turbo FCL is the new pathway.
Okay, so that's a great question, and I want to distinguish between them. Bridges was focused on providing a pathway to companies getting sponsored for the clearance. So, as Peter indicated, you need a contract and a DD-254 in your sponsorship. Bridges was a pathway of let's find innovative talents and get them that contract, DD-254 and FCL sponsorship. Turbo FCL does not help with the sponsorship or a DD-254. It is a web-based application for those that have the DD-254 and sponsorship from somebody else, DARPA, Army, Navy, anybody. And it is a tool of, once you have the sponsorship, it gets you through the process. So Bridges was focused on getting you sponsored. Turbo FCL is, once you're sponsored, let's help get you through the actual clearance process. DARPA Bridges was a pilot. It ended in September of 2025 after we worked with 19 small and non-traditional companies to get them cleared up to TSSCI. DARPA, in our opinion, we did the DARPA thing. We did we de-risked it. We proved out the concept. We figured out how to do it. It is now a template and a process that can be replicated from other organizations. And we are working with other organizations to stand up the new version of Bridges. I just can't say exactly who that's going to be yet. But for everyone here, DARPA Bridges is over. There will be another version that's going to take the lessons learned and make it bigger and better.
Peter, I want to pose maybe the same question to you. When we think about things available for founders, particularly small business founders, where do you think that they should go?
I mean, I'll echo. I think Tim covered this pretty well. So Nooks obviously can offer some consulting. If you have foreign ownership, control, and influence, there's a few entities like Nooks that can help, but a lot of companies will just wind up using a lawyer. There's different law firms that specialize in this. Joe, I think you're in that field. And then there's also companies. There's large companies that do sort of fractional FSO work, like what Nooks does, like ISI is a major one. There's also just a lot of this sort of a cottage industry of folks. So there's a lot of folks that retire from DCSA and do that as either a part-time gig or just to hang their own shingle. There's a lot of consultants out and about. The one thing I will say, just to be cognizant of as you're doing this, one, like I said, getting a clearance before you need it, or getting support to get a clearance before you actually have the DD-254 and the sponsorship and all that, you can wind up wasting a lot of money doing that. We try to advise our even prospective clients, like, if you don't have sponsorship or DD-254 yet, happy to sit down and have a little sales chat, but really you should not bring us on contract until you're ready to get going. Because the point of an expert like Nooks or any of these other folks is to stand up a security program. The other thing I'd say to be cognizant of is some of our clients at Nooks that we support with fractional FSO services are large companies where we're helping them do the personnel security work. So that's handling visit access requests, foreign travel forms, getting their SF-86 filled out, all that stuff. Those companies need our services on an ongoing basis, basically as just plus up security staff. Small companies that we work with, generally speaking, I tell them my interest is to have a relationship with them for 2 to 3 years and then see them sort of graduate from our support. Once you actually have a security system up and running and you've gone through the sponsorship process, you've got your people in place, you've started the training roles, you need to be able to onboard security because it's really not a lot to maintain. It becomes more of a way that you're doing business, less so than an administrative burden. The administrative burden is really not that heavy once you're actually in the process and you're rolling. But after 2 or 3 years, if you've got somebody that's been supporting you for 2 or 3 years, if you haven't brought the sort of a security mindset into your company, at that point, my advice would be either commit to it, commit to the bit, or just don't do it. So it's one of the things that I would advise folks if they're thinking about sort of offboarding some of the security work is keep in mind what your long-term plan is the long-term plan to just get the clearance, get a contract, and then peace, or is the point of this to actually sort of bring this in and change, sort of go that direction as a company? And I think that's sort of at odds with the and think about a lot of, if we're thinking about DoD or the government as a client and we're just thinking like, let's just get this big client in, it can be sort of jarring to think like this client that I'm bringing on is going to change the way that I do business. But that is, I think, how you have to approach this particular issue.
Thank you for that. I want to move on, maybe, but we're getting a lot of questions in this area about employees and the nationalities of people working at your company when you're trying to get a clearance or when you're thinking about this process, right? Export controls are always implicated. So maybe the first question is, to reiterate, when you're applying, which individuals at a company need to receive a security clearance of their own in order to engage in classified work?
Yeah, so the 3 roles that need to be cleared, and this can be one person, it can be 3 people, it can be more than 3 people. One is the senior management official. So this is the top decision maker at your company, and not just by persona, but legally mandated. So every company is going to have somebody that is responsible for making the decisions at that company. This is the person that has legal authority to sign contracts for the company, legal authority to disband the company. That individual, whoever's the ultimate hiring, firing official, a lot of times that's the chief executive officer. Sometimes it's the president. Sometimes it's the executive chairman of the board, whoever that individual is. Sometimes there's 2. Sometimes a company will have both an executive chairman and a chief executive officer, right? Or co-chairman or something. It's going to be in your operating agreement or your articles of incorporation or somewhere in your bylaws. It's going to state who the actual ultimate decision maker is at your company. That person needs to be cleared. Full stop. The other person that you need, and this is somebody that you can nominate. This is not a legal declaration. It literally just takes a letter that says, I'm nominating Joe as my FSO. But your FSO, your facility security officer, needs to be cleared. A lot of times the FSO and the ITPSO, the insider threat security or personnel, insider threat program security officer, those 2 people are often the same person. The requirements there are, I think it's like 40 hours of training or something like that annually for the FSO, and it's something like 10 or 15 for the ITPSO. Sounds like a lot. It's put it on the weekend, just get it done. You can knock it out. unfortunately, even with a fractional FSO company like Nooks, like if you brought us on, somebody would still have to take the training bullet and do that, because you need to have a W-2 employee who is part of your company serving as the FSO. The way to think about this is they need somebody to both call. DCSA needs somebody to call and somebody to hold accountable for the security program at that company. So that the senior management official is the person who can be held accountable for the actions of the company, but the ITPSO and the FSO are the people that are held accountable for the actual security operations of the company. So those two individuals, or those three individuals, however you break that out, those folks need to be cleared. They need to be members of the company. All the work associated with that can be done by other folks. That can be done by myself or somebody else. And if you have folks in your company, like a lot of times you might have an engineer or somebody that's really key to the process who might be a foreign citizen. That's not a problem. It's something to disclose to DCSA to let them know. You will have to carve them out of classified access, because obviously only U.S. citizens can be cleared. Maybe that's not obvious. So there might have to be some controls in place, but in terms of who has to be cleared in order to get your facility clearance, it's those roles: the SMO, FSO, ITPSO. Those are the three roles that absolutely have to be cleared.
Mhm. My firm does a lot of work with export controls, and a lot of our clients have, uh, by virtue of how they're set up and their situations, employ people who are best fit for the role. And oftentimes these are foreign people with the nationalities that are not the United States, or in addition to the United States. So first question for either Tim, Peter, are dual nationals eligible for personnel security licenses?
Yeah, if you're a dual national, you can get a security clearance, but you will have to give up your secondary citizenship.
Full stop.
Full stop. Yep.
Mm. And is this, let's say you employ employees who maybe you don't necessarily want to get a clearance for them. Are you still able to employ them and then just sort of restructure around them so they still provide some of maybe their technical support while you can still get that security clearance?
So once your facility has a clearance, the only individuals who will get cleared, so the only people that will get personnel security clearances, are the people that you nominate. You would only nominate people whose activities under the contractual activity, which grants your facility clearance, are active on that contract, or would need access to classified information in order to perform on that contract. So if you get a facility clearance, you can't just bring the whole company and everybody gets a clearance. It's not like an Oprah moment with clearances. What you have is, once you have the facility clearance, the people that you need to work on that contract in a classified capacity, those people can get sponsored. Everybody else can still work on whatever they're working on, basically outside of the security protocol. There's still some training that you're going to want most of your company to have, just so they're aware, especially if you have foreign investment, or if there's a FOCI mitigation agreement where you're trying to sort of separate maybe your foreign investor or like a foreign parent from some of the activities you're working on. But generally speaking, the classified access, or the aspect of your company that's dealing with anything classified, is going to be a subset of your company, and it's a fairly small subset for a lot of companies, unless the classified work is a tremendous aspect of your income.
Tim, I wanted to get your opinion on this question we got. Um, is there a way that you've seen companies do this, or is there a way that you advise companies to do this, if at all possible, to compartmentalize their clearance in maybe a subsidiary company to avoid putting the entire company through the clearance process? Let's say you're a subsidiary of a larger foreign company or a larger domestic company.
Yes, actually, I've seen this done. When we go back to the discussions earlier about companies that are focused on commercial and then they try to get into the defense world and get a clearance. I've seen firsthand where I had one company that once we wanted to start their FCL sponsorship, they spent about 6 months trying to figure out how to work their board or make it work, working with a specialist of how they could do it. And eventually the only way they could make themselves eligible for a clearance was to stand up a subsidiary and then get the subsidiary cleared. That's definitely a path. There's also foreign companies that can do that as well. That'll have a US-based subsidiary that can get cleared. So that is absolutely a pathway to do so. As long as it makes business sense, right? You can have a commercially focused side of the business and a defense-focused subsidiary. It's kind of up to where the company wants to go and what they think is going to be their best path forward. But, I think the short answer is it is 100% a valid option and path that can be taken.
Would you recommend this in any particular situation, or only if it makes sense after maybe a more precise analysis?
I always try to avoid making recommendations to companies on how to run their business. I just want to provide them with the information, and it's going to have to be up to them to make the determination of what juice is worth what squeeze. So I won't give a specific recommendation. I'll say look at the factors and understand that setting up a subsidiary is a valid option.
I think that makes sense. Maybe continuing with the line of the subsidiary of a foreign company, or maybe you're just a United States company, not even a subsidiary, that has maybe foreign business partners. Is there any special process or particular way that you can get a security clearance while maintaining your business relationship with these foreign partners? It's a bit of an open-ended question, but either Peter or Tim, if you could provide some guidance on that.
I want to defer to Peter on this one. I want to say
Yes,
yes, as long as it's yes, as long as there's not the foreign ownership, control, or influence. Like if it's a relationship, I think that's okay.
Yeah, so I was actually answering this. I've started typing out question and answer. I've started typing out answers in the Q&A section. So yes, foreign relationships, like contractual relationships, are reportable under question 5 of the SF-328. Shouldn't significantly delay or stop your clearance process. Where there's exceptions is under question 7 on the SF-328. So question 5 is just like, do you have foreign contracts? Do you have business relationships overseas? Question 7 is, do you derive a significant amount of your income from either one or multiple foreign sources of income? So, or do you have, I guess foreign suppliers would really be more appropriately disclosed into question 5. So basically, you're either buying stuff from overseas or you're selling stuff overseas, right? So that question 5 and question 7 on the SF-328 are trying to understand that. You could also be partnering with a company, just sort of like a mutual partnership or something, but that would be question 5. Okay, so those are the relationships that you can manage. FOCI mitigation really won't come into play unless there's foreign ownership, control, and influence. The only times throughout my decade at DCSA that I saw one of those other relationships become a serious issue was if a company's entire, like if you're a US distributor essentially for foreign goods, and now you're looking at bringing in something from overseas and reselling it to the US government, that can raise a flag and it might lead to some questions, and DCSA might be interested in basically putting security controls in place around that. The other thing that I can that I've seen occasionally is if your main source of income, because I know that there were companies where like 30-40% of their income was coming from one client overseas, or sometimes you'd have a client overseas that was responsible for like 80 or 90% of a company's income, because that happens. So if that's the case, one of the things DCSA would worry about is what they would call the Walmart effect, where your one client is so big they can kind of dictate the terms of how you operate as a company. Again, that's going to lead them to maybe come up with some security controls. They might ask you to put some sort of control or legal, like a board resolution or something in place that says like, hey, we're not going to, if these people ask for access to classified information, even though they kind of have the lifeblood of their company, of our company in their hands, we're not going to do X, Y, Z. So there will be legal controls if the influence is great enough. In the vast majority of cases, none of that applies. So those are everything that I just described is like a fringe case. For a lot of companies, yes, you've got a lot of foreign suppliers, you've got some foreign clients. That's not a big deal. Report it to the on the SF 328, disclose it to DCSA. I don't advise trying to hide it. More is better, but it's not going to stop anything. DCSA wants to be aware of your situation, but their key interest is in putting in security controls that make essentially protect you and your employees from a foreign entity trying to manipulate access to classified information, right? So if you zoom out for a second, the whole point of all the bureaucratic friction is that if a private US company has access to classified information, that becomes something of interest. They now have access, they hold something that is of sincere interest to foreign intelligence agencies, meaning there is an interest in channeling influence through your company to try to get to that classified information. So all of these things, all of the controls, all the weird bullshit that goes on, all of that, the point of it is to try to protect you and your company from that influence, right? So if you think of it in those terms, any kind of open relationship that you have with a foreign entity, any controls that are going to be put in place are just to protect you from being influenced by them for the purpose of access. And I know we're at time, so let me wrap that up.
That's why I was
Thanks.
jumping on here. Yes, unfortunately, have to wrap it up. Really do appreciate it. Thanks everyone for being here. Special thanks to you, Joseph, for moderating. You did a great job. And for Tim and Peter, I feel like we've just, hit the tip of the iceberg here. Really, you guys have so much to offer. But thanks for taking time out of your day to share your thoughts and your wisdom on this topic. So obviously it's a hot topic. Lots of people asking questions. I know that there may have been a couple questions that we didn't get to, and I'm sorry about that. But we may be able to send some follow-ups when we send out the recording. We'll just have to see on that. So to the audience, I hope it was helpful. And our next webinar will be in May. And we will be talking about partnerships, and it's called Stronger Together, Unlocking Space Through Partnerships. We'll talk about why they're important, especially to companies who are pursuing national security, how to get partnerships, how to evaluate the pros and potential risks, and how to protect your interests. So we hope to get some of our alumni on here to talk candidly about their experiences with partnerships and why they were important to their progress. So Dorothy, I think she already put the link in the chat, so go ahead and click on that if you want to register. And if you liked this webinar and thought it was helpful, check out our YouTube channel. There are 25 others, and we even have more than that on our website too. So they're just like this one with practical knowledge and things you can take away and use as you move forward on your journey. And also, please take a moment to answer the questions on the survey that we will have pop up right as you leave. We appreciate your honest feedback, and it really helps us to improve and to offer more of what you need. Recording will be available. It will be posted on YouTube. We'll also send out a link to it after this webinar. Look for it in the next week, like by Friday, I would think. And with that, we will say goodbye and we'll see you next time. Thanks all. It was great having you here.